is I wanted to know if it's possible to overcome lust and to be able to spend 5 to 6 months without orgasm, masturbation, or wet dreams, and sex and porn.
Okay, yeah. Well, I think a big part of that question is the fact that it started at a fairly young age and that it has remained with that individual. And so probably a lot of that question is, this has been with me for a long time. What can I do to ultimately make a change, and how do I deal with that? So I guess there's a couple components to mention. One is that, at 12 years old, that's a time of great change in life. That's when puberty is really starting to kick in, especially for boys. 12 to 14, that's really when it starts to take hold, and those changes start to happen, where things of a sexual nature start to really become an interest. And the natural changes, such as the wet dreams and the discovery of an attraction to either the opposite gender or the same gender, in a sexual manner, begins to take form. And so the curiosity is certainly huge at that age. It's kind of a newfound experience. So suddenly you're sort of a young adult with a kind of a children's brain, if you will, because our logic hasn't developed yet, and so we're not quite sure how to make total sense of all of the physiological, biological changes that are happening at that age. And so we start to experiment, and experimentation and curiosity and just learning more and more about our own bodies as well as the bodies of other people help us to develop that interest as well as that urge. And certainly we discover that certain things feel good and certain things are rewarding, and so we start to reward our brains as we do experiment and start to receive those rewards in that way. So, and then transitioning to the question about whether it can be overcome, most definitely it can be overcome. I've seen many people who have been able to identify, why is it that I'm experiencing such a strong desire to do this? Many people do define a lustful feeling as part of their experience, where they're feeling almost a insatiable desire to act out, and since they don't have necessarily a partner to have a sexual encounter with, and age obviously has a lot to do with that. Also decisions about pairing up with somebody, but because there's more of an individual experience typically at that age, those habits can form as a simple cycle of triggers and rewards. And but it is definitely possible to work through those things as somebody starts to figure out, okay, why do I have such an impulse? Understanding the natural elements of that, but also understanding that the logic part of our brain takes a while to catch up. And so the ability to master the sexual impulses that come at a young age, it can take some time to learn that and to feel like there's a sense of ability to manage that. It is definitely possible. I've seen lots of people really take hold of those kinds of behaviors that seem nearly impossible to get over, and they've been able to find other ways to cope. And I guess the final comment to answer this question would be that oftentimes the sexual response can essentially become a way to cope. And so coping mechanisms, as we understand coping mechanisms, we start to realize that there are certain situations that cause us to want to cope. And in fact, Tony's showing on the screen right now some of the typical scenarios that we experience when we feel the need to cope. So if we're bored, if we're lonely, I hear a lot of clients who talk about feeling a lot of stress, feeling overwhelmed, they're afraid. So those types of emotions and situations can often trigger a desire to cope. And so when we know that a reward is very easy to achieve through a sexual behavior, and it's very fast to achieve that and to cope, then we can turn to that as a coping mechanism very easily. But as we learn other ways to cope with those kinds of difficult emotions and situations, as we learn about trigger management, and as we learn about the scenarios, the life scenarios that are more often causing us those coping situations, we're better able to plan how to deal with those. And so in the course of learning coping strategies, thought management, and simply understanding the nature of the sexual experience and the sexual impulse, all those things can come together to really help us to manage that behavior over time, and it's certainly possible, definitely.